By the winter of 1944, the war in Western Europe had collapsed inward on itself. Cities were broken, roads were cratered, and entire units, German and Allied alike, were moving through landscapes that no longer felt civilian or military, just exhausted. The Rhine Valley, once green and thriving, now bore the scars of months of fighting. Trees stood as blackened skeletons. Villages were reduced to walls without roofs, churches without steeples, homes without families. In this shifting space, thousands of German women were taken into custody by advancing US forces. Some had worn auxiliary uniforms. Others were clerks, factory workers, nurses or civilians, swept up during evacuations. Many had never imagined themselves as prisoners of war at all. They were cold, underfed and confused, but they still believed there were lines that would not be crossed. They believed the stories they'd been told about what Americans did to captured women. They believed the propaganda. They were wrong. Because one morning, without warning or explanation, an order was given that none of them expected to hear. They were told to carry the dead. Anna Weber was 19 years old when she heard those words. She stood in a muddy field near the Rhine, surrounded by 200 shivering women, all waiting to learn what would happen to them. The morning was December 15th, 1944. The air smelled like frozen earth and distant smoke. Her breath came in white clouds. She clutched a photograph inside her thin coat, a picture of her father taken before the war, before the bombs fell on Berlin and turned him to ash. Anna had been told many things about Americans. Her father told her before he died. Her uncle Ernst told her in his letters from the front. The party officials told her when she volunteered for war work in the factories. They all said the same thing. The Americans were animals. They would rape. They would torture. They would leave German women to die in the cold. If you are captured, Anna, die first. That's what her uncle wrote. Die first because the Americans show no mercy. Anna believed him. She believed everything. 20 feet away, Ilse Hoffmann twisted the engagement ring hidden inside her coat lining. She was 24, a former Luftwaffe administrative clerk from Munich, and she had learned early in the war that survival meant calculation. She spoke basic English learned in school before everything changed. She knew how to read the faces of guards, how to predict violence before it arrived. But now, standing in the freezing mud, she couldn't calculate what was coming. The American officer who'd just arrived looked tired, not cruel. His uniform was clean, which meant power. But his face showed no satisfaction, no anticipation. That confused her. In Ilse's experience, men who enjoyed cruelty always showed it first in their eyes. Her fiancé Klaus was missing on the Eastern Front. September was the last time she'd heard from him. His letters had stopped. The Red Cross had no information. Ilse knew what that meant, but she refused to let herself think it. Instead, she twisted the ring, a small circle of gold that represented a future she might never see. Margareta Schmidt stood near the edge of the group, watching a younger woman cough into her sleeve. Margareta was 46, a Red Cross nurse from Hamburg, and she'd spent the last 3 years in field hospitals, watching men die from wounds that would have been treatable in peacetime. She'd learned to recognize the sound of pneumonia in a cough, the color of frostbite on fingers, the hollow look in someone's eyes when they'd given up. Her 2 sons were somewhere out there, Werner fighting the Russians, Friedrich somewhere in France. She hadn't heard from either in months. The uncertainty was worse than knowing. At least with the dying soldiers in her hospital she'd known. She'd been able to close their eyes, whisper prayers, give them dignity in their final moments. Here she had nothing to give, not even hope. The American translator stepped forward. He was young, maybe mid-20s, with nervous hands and careful German pronunciation. Behind him stood the officer, a lieutenant with tired eyes, and a face that looked like it hadn't smiled in months. The translator cleared his throat. The women went silent. "You will be assigned to burial detail today," the translator said. His German was formal textbook perfect. "There are 43 German soldiers who were killed in fighting last week. The ground is too frozen for proper graves to be dug efficiently. Disease risk is mounting. The male prisoners are assigned to other work. You will assist with moving the bodies and preparing them for burial. This is not a punishment. This is a necessity under the Geneva Convention. You will be given breaks, medical supervision, and food. But the work must be done." Silence. Anna felt her stomach turn. This was it. This was how the humiliation would begin. They would be forced to touch corpses, handle rotting bodies, and then the Americans would photograph them, use the images for propaganda. Her uncle had warned her. They will break you in ways you cannot imagine. "Quiet," Margaret said, not unkindly, as Anna whispered her fears to the woman beside her. "Let them finish." Ilse said nothing. She was calculating. Burial detail meant corpses. Corpses meant disease risk, which meant the Americans genuinely needed the work done. If they needed the work done, they couldn't afford to brutalize the workers. It was logical. But propaganda had never been logical. The lieutenant stepped forward. He spoke in English, and even those who couldn't understand the words could read his body language. Not aggressive, not mocking, just firm. "I know this is difficult," he said through the translator. "I know you've been told things about how we treat prisoners. I can't change what you believe, but I can tell you this. We will treat you according to the rules. No one will harm you. No one will humiliate you. You will work, and when the work is done, you will return to camp. That's all." The translator hesitated before continuing. "The lieutenant also says that he hates giving this order, that he knows it will be hard, but the dead deserve burial, and there is no one else." No one else. The words hung in the frozen air. Anna thought about her Uncle Ernst missing since November last letter mentioning the Rhine. No one else to bury him either, if he was dead. Ilse thought about Klaus frozen somewhere on the Eastern Front. No one else to find him. Margareta thought about Sophie Richter, her protégée, the young nurse she'd left behind during the evacuation 3 weeks ago. No one else to carry that guilt. When the guards came to lead them out, they walked in silence through what remained of a town. Burnt buildings leaned against each other like exhausted soldiers. A church steeple lay across a street, forcing them to climb over rubble. The only sounds were boots on broken stone and the wind cutting through empty windows. The smell arrived before the sight. Sweet and sickly, unmistakable. Several women stopped walking without realizing it. Anna's stomach heaved. The smell grew stronger with each step. They rounded a corner, and there it was. The burial site. 43 bodies laid out in rough rows near the collapsed remains of a church. Some were covered with canvas tarps, dark stains seeping through. Most were not covered. Frozen mud clung to uniforms. Faces were pale, some peaceful, others locked in expressions of pain. Helmets lay scattered nearby. Identification tags dangled from necks. Anna recognized the uniform insignia on the nearest body. Munich Home Guard 3rd Battalion, the same unit her brother had served in before he transferred east in 1943. This wasn't a faceless enemy. This was someone's neighbor. An American medic stood near the body's Red Cross armband, bright against his uniform. He was young, maybe 20, with kind eyes. As the women approached, he crossed himself. He did it again when the lieutenant approached. The lieutenant nodded. The medic relaxed slightly. PFC Thomas Riley was his name, though the women wouldn't learn that until later. His mother was German, immigrated from Bavaria in 1925. His grandmother still lived in Stuttgart, or had before the bombing. He'd grown up speaking German at home, English everywhere else. When the war came, he'd enlisted as a medic because he couldn't stomach the thought of killing someone who might be related to him. The lieutenant gave instructions through the translator. 2 women per body. Lift carefully by shoulders and feet. Move to the trench the engineers had already dug. Lay the bodies down gently. Do not drop them. They deserve dignity. Medical breaks every 30 minutes. Water and coffee are available. The women stared. Coffee. That couldn't be right. Germans hadn't seen real coffee since 1941. Only ersatz, burned grain and acorns ground into brown powder that tasted like dirt. Real coffee, the translator repeated. American supply. It will be available during breaks. The lieutenant looked at the women, at their pale faces and shaking hands and obvious terror, and felt something twist in his chest. His name was James Cooper. He was 26 years old. He'd lost his brother Tom at Normandy. In June, watched him bleed out on Omaha Beach. Tom had been 23, engaged, planning to come home and open a garage in Cleveland. James Cooper had buried his brother in a temporary grave and promised himself he'd never forget what it felt like to lower someone he loved into the ground. Now he was ordering women to do the same thing. He hated this order. But there were 43 bodies. Disease was a real risk, and someone had to do the work. Under Geneva Convention regulations, prisoners could be required to work as long as the work wasn't dangerous or degrading. Was this degrading? Cooper didn't know anymore. The translator began calling out names, pairing women based on proximity. Ilse and Margaret found themselves together. Anna was paired with an older woman named Frida. They approached the first body. He was young, 18 maybe, face peaceful. His uniform was frozen stiff. "Take the shoulders," Margaret said quietly. "I'll take the feet. On 3. When they lifted, the weight was shocking. Dead weight pulled downward differently. It resisted balance, made every step feel like moving through water. They stumbled after 3 steps, nearly dropped him. Lieutenant Cooper stepped forward instantly, not angry. Just there, steadying Ilse's elbow with gentle pressure, helping her regain balance without touching the body itself. "Slowly," he said in English. "Take your time. He deserves dignity." Margaret whispered in German, a nurse's prayer she'd said over countless dying men. "Gott sei mit dir, junger Mann." "God be with you, young man." Her voice cracked. By the time they laid him down gently in the shallow grave, both women were crying, silent tears that froze on their cheeks. PFC Riley stepped forward with the identification tag, placing it carefully on the young soldier's chest. He covered the face with canvas. Then he stepped back and crossed himself again. That gesture broke something in Ilse. This American medic was showing more reverence for a dead German soldier than the Wehrmacht had shown for its own casualties in the chaotic retreat. The propaganda said Americans were godless. But here was proof otherwise. Anna watched from a distance. 12 bodies had been carried by the time her name was called. When the translator pointed to her, then to Frida, then to the 13th body, Anna stepped forward on legs that didn't feel like her own. The body was older, 50 maybe, Home Guard uniform. Anna bent down to take the feet, and when she looked at his face, the world stopped. "Uncle Ernst!" The scream came before she could stop it, a raw animal sound of grief that cut through the frozen air. Anna fell to her knees beside the body, hands reaching for his face. "Onkel Ernst," she sobbed, shaking his shoulders. "999. Onkel Ernst, wake up." Margareta ran over, pulling Anna back gently but firmly. Anna fought her, trying to make sense of this. Her Uncle Ernst, missing since November. Last letter said he was defending a Rhine crossing. Last letter said if the Americans captured her, she should die first because they'd show no mercy. And now here he was, dead, frozen, waiting for his niece to carry him to an unmarked grave. PFC Riley brought water, a blanket crouching beside them with careful movements. He didn't speak, just offered water and warmth and presence. Lieutenant Cooper walked over slowly. He spoke quietly to the translator. The translator knelt beside Anna. The lieutenant says you have a choice. You can rest. Someone else will carry your uncle, or you can continue. You can honor him yourself. It's your choice. Anna lifted her face. Her eyes were red, swollen, but there was something new in them now. Not just grief, determination. She wiped her face and stood up, looked at Lieutenant Cooper, said in broken English, "I carry him. He is family. I not let strangers touch." Cooper nodded once, stepped back, waited. Anna and Margareta lifted Ernst Weber together. Anna talked to him the entire way to the trench, words tumbling out in German. "Onkel Ernst, it's Anna. Do you remember teaching me to ride a bicycle? You said Americans were monsters. But look, they're burying you with respect. They're letting me carry you. You were wrong, Uncle. I'm so sorry you died afraid." They reached the trench, laid him down gently. Anna removed his wedding ring, slipped it into her pocket for Aunt Hilda, placed his helmet on his chest. Lieutenant Cooper spoke quietly to his men. 6 American soldiers lined up beside the grave. They removed their helmets, stood at attention. The chaplain, Captain David Mueller, stepped forward and spoke a brief blessing in German. "Herr, erbarme dich seiner Seele. War ein Soldat. Verdient Würde. Lord, have mercy on his soul. He was a soldier. He deserves dignity." 3 rifle volleys cracked through the frozen air. Proper military funeral honors for a German soldier, given by American forces, witnessed by 200 stunned German women who'd been told Americans were savages. Everything she'd been told was a lie. The propaganda, the warnings, the certainty that Americans were monsters, all of it, lies. She looked at Lieutenant Cooper and understood that the enemy was not what she'd expected. That mercy was real, that even in war, some men chose to be better than hatred demanded. As the sun dropped lower, 28 German soldiers had been buried. 15 remained. The women returned to camp in silence, walking differently than they had that morning. Slower, heavier, changed. That night, Anna couldn't sleep. She clutched her uncle's wedding ring, thinking about his last letter. He'd been wrong about the Americans. Somewhere in the darkness, Ilse twisted her engagement ring and thought about Klaus, wondering if anyone had shown him the same mercy. Margareta stared at the ceiling, thinking about Sophie Richter, the young nurse she'd abandoned. The first day of burial detail was over, but the real transformation had only just begun. Morning came cold and grey. Anna woke before the guards called for assembly, her body aching everywhere. Her shoulders burned. Her hands were swollen, the skin cracked and raw. She'd dreamed of her Uncle Ernst all night. Margareta was already awake, sitting with her back against the wall, eyes unfocused. Ilse stood near the door, watching the guards through a crack, always calculating, always alert. The call came at 6. Assembly in the center yard. Anna expected to be marched back to the burial site. 15 bodies remained. But Lieutenant Cooper stood waiting with a different expression today. Uncertainty, maybe, or conflict. "The burial detail is officially complete," Cooper said. "Army engineers will finish the cemetery work. Headstones, markers, landscaping. You've done more than was required. You'll return to regular camp duties today." The translator repeated the words in German. A ripple of relief moved through the crowd. It was over. They'd survived. But then something unexpected happened. Anna Weber stepped forward. The movement was so sudden that even Anna herself seemed surprised. She walked 3 steps toward Lieutenant Cooper, stopped and spoke in halting English. "Sir, we would like to continue. Please." Complete silence. 200 women stared. The translator blinked. Even Cooper froze. "Excuse me," he said. "My uncle, all of them. They need names, markers, someone to remember. We finish. We make proper. Please." Cooper looked at her for a long moment. This 19-year-old girl who'd screamed over her uncle's body yesterday was volunteering to go back. Before he could respond, Ilse stepped forward. "If she stays, I stay. They're our dead. Our responsibility. If you're willing to honor them, we should too." Then Margaret moved through the crowd. "I'm a nurse. I know how to record information for families. Someone should write down what happened here, someone who saw them treated with dignity. Please, let us finish this." Cooper felt something shift in his chest. Prisoners didn't volunteer for hard labor. They especially didn't volunteer to honor enemy dead. This violated every assumption he'd made. He made a decision that would haunt and sustain him for 45 years. "I'll allow it," Cooper said slowly, "but on one condition." Anna held her breath. "American casualties are coming in from the Ardennes offensive," Cooper continued. "When they arrive, you'll help bury them too. If you want to honor your dead, you'll understand why we honor ours. If you can't do that, the answer is no." The words hit like physical blows. Bury American soldiers, the men who killed Germans. Anna's first instinct was to refuse. Her father died in American bombing raids. Her uncle died fighting Americans. How could she help bury the people who destroyed her family? But then she remembered the rifle volleys, the chaplain's prayer in German, the way Cooper had steadied her arm, the coffee, the wool blanket. The Americans had chosen mercy when they could have chosen cruelty. Could she do less? Ilse spoke first. "My fiancé is missing on the Eastern Front. I think he's dead. I'll never know if anyone buried him with care. But I'll bury your dead the same way you buried ours, because someone has to break the cycle." Margaret nodded. "I'm a nurse. We care for all wounded, all dying, no matter whose side. That doesn't change just because they're already dead." Anna looked at her uncle's wedding ring. "We will bury your dead with the same care," she said in halting English. "That is what humans do, not Germans, not Americans, humans." Cooper felt his throat tighten. He nodded once. "Report to PFC Riley at 0800 tomorrow. You'll be given proper winter coats, work gloves and increased rations. This is official duty now. Understood?" "Understood," Margaret said. The next morning, December 16th, they reported to the cemetery site. PFC Riley was waiting with 3 American Army winter coats, thick wool with quilted linings, warmer than anything the women had worn in years. There were leather work gloves and thick wool socks. Anna put on the coat and almost cried. It was warm, actually warm. "Thank you," she whispered in English. Riley nodded. "Can't have you getting frostbite. You're doing important work." Important work, not prisoner labor. The distinction mattered more than Anna could articulate. They spent the next 2 weeks finishing the German section of the cemetery. Each grave received a white wooden cross with the soldier's name, rank, unit, and date carefully painted in black letters. Margareta kept meticulous records in a ledger Chaplain Muller provided. It was painstaking sacred work. And somewhere in the repetition, something shifted in all 3 women. They stopped thinking of the bodies as symbols of the enemy. They started thinking of them as sons, brothers, fathers, humans who died far from home and deserved to be remembered. On December 25th, Christmas morning, something unexpected happened. The American cook prepared a meal for all the POWs, and when the women lined up expecting thin soup and black bread, they received something else entirely. Roasted turkey, golden brown with crispy skin, mashed potatoes with real butter, cranberry sauce, fresh white rolls, apple pie with flaky crust. Anna took one bite of turkey, and the tears came. This is what they feed prisoners. They'd starved on less when they were free. Germany had been rationing since 1939, cutting portions every year. And here in a war zone, the Americans were serving Christmas dinner. "This is abundance," Margaret whispered. "This is what America means." Ilse ate slowly, thinking about Klaus. If he was in a Soviet camp, he wasn't eating turkey. The comparison was unbearable. After the meal, Lieutenant Cooper walked through the cemetery where the three women were working despite the holiday. He carried 3 small packages. "Merry Christmas," he said through Riley. "Even in war, some things should be sacred." He handed Anna a package. Inside were thick wool socks and a small American flag. "For after the war," Cooper said. "Remember, enemies today, friends someday." Ilse received an English-German dictionary and a Hershey's chocolate bar. Real chocolate, dark and rich. She held it like it was made of gold. Margaret received medical supplies and a small wooden cross with an inscription, "For Sophie." Cooper had heard her talking about the nurse she'd abandoned. "You didn't abandon her," Cooper said gently. "You survived. Those are different things." Margareta couldn't speak. She just held the cross and nodded, tears streaming. That night, the 3 women sat together sharing pieces of the chocolate bar. "Why are they doing this?" Anna asked. "The food, the gifts, the respect. Why?" "Because they're winning," Ilse said. "They can afford to be generous." "No," Margaret said softly. "It's more than that. They're showing us who they choose to be. Winning gives them the power to be cruel or kind. They're choosing kind. That's the difference between them and us. We chose cruelty when we had power. They're choosing differently." Anna thought about that long after the others fell asleep. Germany had chosen cruelty. The camps, the executions, the contempt for human life. Germany had power and used it to destroy. America had power and was using it to feed prisoners turkey on Christmas. Mercy wasn't weakness. Mercy was strength. It took strength to feed your enemies. It took strength to bury their dead with honor. It took strength to choose kindness when cruelty would be easier. Germany had been strong in all the wrong ways. America was strong in a way Anna was only beginning to understand. On January the 3rd, 1945, everything changed again. A truck arrived from the Ardennes front exhaust clouding white. 6 bodies. American casualties from the Battle of the Bulge. Lieutenant Cooper met the truck personally. When they unloaded the first body bag, and he saw the name, his face went white. Sergeant Michael Russo, Cleveland, Ohio, 28 years old, Cooper's childhood friend. Cooper knelt beside the body bag and broke, not dramatically, not loudly, but completely. His shoulders shook, his head dropped, and he wept like a man who'd been holding everything inside for too long. Anna watched from 30 feet away and understood something fundamental. The Americans grieved like Germans did. They hurt like anyone did. The enemy was human, actually, painfully, impossibly human. Without speaking, all 3 women walked toward Cooper. They knelt beside him in the mud and waited until he looked up. Anna spoke first. "Sir, we will prepare him, if you allow." Cooper stared at her, tears still wet on his face. Why would you help bury an American soldier?" Anna thought about her Uncle Ernst, about the rifle volleys and the prayer. "Because someone somewhere maybe prepared my uncle when I could not. Maybe enemy soldiers gave him dignity. I do this for them. I do this because it is right." Cooper looked at these 3 women offering to honor his friend, and something inside him fundamentally transformed. This was why Tom died. This was why they were fighting. For this. For the possibility that enemies could become humans again. He nodded, unable to speak, and stepped back. The three women prepared Sergeant Rousseau's body with the same care they'd given to German soldiers. They washed his face. Anna closed his eyes. Margareta folded the American flag properly. Ilse placed his identification tags on his chest. They carried him to the grave together, all three women and PFC Riley sharing the weight. And when they laid him down, Chaplain Mueller spoke prayers in English, while the German women bowed their heads and mourned a man who died fighting their country. The rifle volleys cracked across the frozen cemetery. Taps played lonely and pure, and Lieutenant James Cooper stood among German women who'd chosen grace over hatred and understood that he'd witnessed something rare and precious. A moment when war stopped and humanity continued. 5 more days they worked together. Each morning at 8, Anna, Ilse and Margaret reported to PFC Riley and spent the day ensuring every grave was marked, every name recorded, every soldier given dignity. On January 8th, 1945, Lieutenant Cooper announced the work was complete. The cemetery held 43 German soldiers and 6 Americans, each with a white cross. Winter pansies bloomed at the edges. The women had planted them carefully, making the cemetery look less like a scar and more like a place of peace. Cooper brought an army photographer. He wanted this recorded because what had happened here mattered. The photographer gestured for the 3 women to stand among the graves. Anna held flowers. Ilse held the burial records ledger. Margareta clutched Sophie Richter's Red Cross armband. Behind them stood the American Guards' helmets under their arms. The camera clicked. The moment was preserved. Lieutenant Cooper kept a personal copy of that photograph for 45 years. Before the women were transferred to Camp Como, Mississippi, Cooper gave each of them something to remember. To Anna, her Uncle Ernst's identification tag and an English phrase book. To Ilse, the photograph of the completed cemetery and a chocolate bar. To Margaret, Sophie's armband officially, and an address, PFC Riley's grandmother in Stuttgart. If you survive, if you find her, tell her Thomas is alive. Tell her he remembers her. Tell her he loves her, Cooper said. The truck came at dawn. As they pulled away, Anna looked back one last time toward the cemetery. She saw Lieutenant Cooper walking alone toward the graves, his posture heavy with grief. The truck turned a corner, and the cemetery disappeared. But the weight of what had happened there remained. Camp Como, Mississippi was different. Real barracks, hot showers, regular meals, medical care. The women were assigned to work in the camp hospital. Anna taught English classes using the phrase book Cooper had given her. She told the story of the burial detail to skeptical audiences. Some believed her. Others insisted she was naive. But Anna knew what she'd experienced. She'd carried her uncle's body and received rifle volleys in his honor. She'd eaten turkey on Christmas. She'd buried an American sergeant with her own hands. Those weren't propaganda techniques. They were choices. On May 8, 1945, the announcement came. Victory in Europe. The war was over. The German prisoners felt nothing like joy. The war might be over, but Germany was destroyed. But it also meant survival. Late in May, Ilse received a Red Cross notification. Klaus Hoffmann. Reported killed December 29, 1944, Eastern Front. Soviet records confirmed frozen to death in an open field. Body recovered, March 1945, buried in a mass grave outside Minsk. No marker. December 29th, 4 days after she'd eaten Christmas turkey. Klaus had been dying in the snow while she was warm and safe. Margareta found her that evening sitting alone. He was already dead, Ilse whispered. When I carried those American soldiers, Klaus was already dead, and I didn't know. You honored him, Margareta said quietly. Every American soldier you buried for Klaus. Every prayer you said for him. You hoped someone was doing the same for him. That hope matters, even if it was too late. Ilse would never remove the ring. This ring was her promise, not just to Klaus, but to the person she'd become while carrying the dead. The person who learned that enemies were humans, that mercy was strength. The summer passed slowly. The women were separated, assigned to different ships. They promised to write, but Europe was destroyed. Addresses no longer existed. Letters were lost. For 44 years, Anna, Ilse, and Margaret believed they would never see each other again. Anna returned to Berlin in fall 1945, 70% destroyed. She found her father's grave and told him everything the propaganda had gotten wrong. She gave Aunt Hilda Ernst's wedding ring. When Anna described the full military honors, Aunt Hilda cried for an hour. Anna married Peter Klein in 1948. They had 3 children. In 1955, she became a school teacher, teaching history honestly, despite criticism and neo-Nazi death threats. She never stopped teaching the truth. Ilse returned to Munich. In 1949, she immigrated to America under the German war bride quota. She settled in St. Louis, working as a translator. In 1952, she met Robert Williams, an American veteran. When they married, Ilse kept Klaus's ring on a chain around her neck. Robert never asked her to remove it. They had 2 daughters. Margareta returned to Hamburg. Werner returned from Soviet captivity in 1946, emaciated but alive. Friedrich never came home. Killed in France, December 1944. In 1947, Margareta travelled to Stuttgart with Riley's grandmother's address. When she delivered the message that Thomas was alive, Frau Müller cried for an hour. In 1954, Margareta wrote a memoir, Die Toten tragen, Carrying the Dead. The book was controversial. In 1962, it was translated to English as The Weight We Carried, a German Nurse's Story of American Mercy. It became required reading in US military ethics courses. Decades passed. The 3 women lived separate lives connected by memory, but divided by distance. They aged, they raised families, they told their stories to anyone who would listen. And then, in November 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. 3 women separately watching the same news felt the same pull. A need to return. Anna Weber, 64, decided to visit Luxembourg. December 15, 1989, 45th anniversary. Ilse Hoffmann. Williams, 69, booked a flight. Same date. Margareta Schmidt, 90, told her son Werner she needed to return one last time. None of them knew the others would be there. But on December 15, 1989, 3 women arrived at the same cemetery within an hour of each other. And they were not alone. Lieutenant James Cooper, now 71, had been coming to this cemetery every December 15th since 1945. 44 years. He came to remember the 3 German women who'd taught him that mercy was stronger than revenge. When Margaret arrived first, she gasped. The cemetery was beautiful, immaculate, every cross painted white, every name clear. Then she saw another old woman approaching. "Ilse!" Margaret called out. Ilse turned and knew immediately. 45 years vanished. They embraced with tears and laughter. Then Anna arrived, saw them embracing, and ran. Suddenly all 3 were together again, crying and laughing, holding each other. A voice spoke behind them. "I was hoping you'd come." They turned and saw Lieutenant James Cooper. White hair, deep lines, but unmistakably the same person who'd stood in frozen mud 45 years ago. He held the photograph from January 1945. 3 women standing among graves, preserved all these years. I come every year, Cooper said, voice rough with emotion. December 15th, anniversary of the day you taught me what America is supposed to mean. I've been waiting, hoping that someday you'd come back. He looked at Anna. You carried your uncle and forgave us before we forgave ourselves. That saved me from becoming bitter. At Ilse. You buried my friend when you had every reason to hate us. You showed me what grace looks like at Margaret. You kept records so families would know. You're the reason we're here. Anna stepped forward and embraced Lieutenant Cooper. She held him like he was family, because he was. You gave my uncle dignity when you could have given us cruelty, Anna whispered in English. That changed everything. Thank you. Behind Cooper stood PFC Thomas Riley, now 65, with his German wife, their children and grandchildren. They spent 3 hours together that day, walking through the cemetery, reading every name. 23 people, total 3 generations standing together. They took a new photograph. 3 old women, 2 elderly veterans, 23 descendants, all standing together among the graves. The photograph would later be displayed in the Luxembourg American Cemetery Museum, showing that enemies could become family. But the story did not end there. Anna Weber died in 2003, age 78. Margareta Schmidt in 1998, age 99. Lieutenant Cooper in 2001, age 77. PFC Riley in 2010, age 85. Ilse Hoffman-Williams was the last to go. She died in 2015, age 95, in St. Louis. She'd never removed Klaus's ring. Her gravestone read, "She carried the dead and learned to carry hope." She proved that enemies can become family if someone has the courage to be merciful first. But the story did not end with their deaths either. Every December 15 ceremonies continued at the Luxembourg Cemetery. American and German students traveled together, maintaining the graves, learning the history. In 2019, an exchange program was created, the Weber-Hoffmann-Schmidt Fellowship for International Understanding. Its motto, "That is what humans do, not Germans, not Americans, humans." On December 15, 2024, the 80th anniversary, Sarah Williams stood at the cemetery entrance. 22 years old, studying international relations at Georgetown, carrying a photograph of her great-grandmother Ilse. She walked through the gates and found the graves exactly as the photographs had shown. She placed flowers on Ilse's memorial plaque, then on Ernst Weber's grave. "You're Sarah Williams." She turned. A young man, maybe her age, German accent. "I'm Lucas Weber. Anna was my great-grandmother." They stood there, descendants of women who'd been enemy prisoners together 80 years ago. "I brought this," Lucas said, pulling out a notebook. "Anna's diary, from 1944. Thought maybe we could read it together." They sat on a bench, and Lucas opened it carefully. He translated slowly. December 15th, 1944. Today, I carried a dead soldier. Uncle Ernst. An American officer ordered me to do it, and I thought it was punishment. But he steadied my arm when I stumbled. Said Ernst deserved dignity. I did not understand. I was 19 and full of propaganda. But now tonight I think maybe I was wrong about everything. Lucas continued. December 16th, 1944. I volunteered to continue the work. I don't know why. But when the lieutenant said we'd have to bury American soldiers too, I agreed, because Uncle Ernst got honors from enemies he'd fought against. And if they could choose mercy, how could I choose less? December 25th, 1944. They gave us turkey for Christmas. Real turkey. I cried when I tasted it, not because it was delicious, but because it meant everything I'd been told was a lie. We starved while they had abundance. We chose cruelty while they chose kindness. And I will never forget this. Never. They sat in silence. "She spent her whole life teaching this," Lucas said. "Anna taught history in Berlin, fought administrators, got death threats from neo-Nazis, never stopped." "Ilsa did the same," Sarah said. "In America, told everyone that enemies could become friends, that mercy wasn't weakness." They placed flowers on every grave together, reading each name aloud. Then they stood at the memorial plaque and read together, Sarah in English, Lucas in German. "They carried the dead. We carry the lesson." That afternoon at the ceremony, they spoke without notes. "Our great-grandmothers were enemies," Sarah said. "They spoke different languages, believed different things, fought on different sides. But they learned that the enemy was just a human being waiting for someone to prove that grace was stronger than hatred, and they spent the rest of their lives trying to teach that lesson." "We are here because they chose mercy," Lucas continued. "We are friends because they refused to let hatred win. We can stand together at these graves because 80 years ago women and soldiers chose dignity over revenge. That choice cost them nothing but gave us everything." They laid a wreath together, tied with American and German ribbons. As the ceremony ended, Sarah and Lucas exchanged contact information. They'd stay in touch, create something together, be friends. "Thank you," Lucas said, "for being here, for understanding." "Thank you," Sarah replied, "for bringing her diary, for caring that this mattered." They hugged these descendants of enemies and walked away in opposite directions. The cemetery remained, the graves remained, the lesson remained, and somewhere 3 women who'd carried the dead in December 1944 looked down at their great-grandchildren standing together and knew the weight they'd carried had been worth it. The weight of the dead never really left their hands, but it had become lighter over the decades, shared across generations, transformed from burden into blessing, from trauma into teaching, from horror into hope. They carried the dead. We carry the lesson. The cemetery remained. The graves remained. The lesson remained. 80 years after Anna Weber carried her uncle's body through frozen mud, after Ilse Hoffmann chose grace over grief, after Margaret Schmidt learned that mercy could redeem guilt, their great-grandchildren stood together, proving what the dead had taught, that enemies can become family if someone has the courage to be merciful first. The weight of the dead never really left their hands, but it had become lighter over the decades, shared across generations, transformed from burden into blessing, from trauma into teaching, from horror into hope that refused to die. They carried the dead so we could carry hope. They chose mercy so we could choose peace. They proved it was possible. They carried the dead. We carry the lesson, and the lesson echoes still.